Before we begin, take 1 second and do something small that helps this channel in a big way. Hit like, subscribe, and stay with me until the end, because this story is not just about one rapper, one crash, or one viral clip. This is about what happens when influence becomes more dangerous than the accident itself. Because sometimes, the scariest thing is not the wreck. It is the lesson someone takes from surviving it. And that is exactly why so many people are talking right now. A young star, millions of fans, a history of pain, growth, reinvention, and spiritual transformation. A man who built part of his image around healing, discipline, self-awareness, and becoming better. And yet, in one clip with one sentence, he managed to spark outrage across the internet and force people to ask a difficult question. How can someone preach wellness while rejecting one of the most basic forms of safety there is? That contradiction is at the center of this entire story. Because when NLE Choppa spoke about seat belts, people did not just hear a reckless opinion. They heard something deeper. They heard a mindset, a mentality, a pattern that says survival equals wisdom, even when the evidence says the opposite. And that is what makes this story so unsettling. This is not just about a rapper saying something wild online. This is about how trauma can distort confidence, how luck can get mistaken for invincibility, and how one viral moment can plant dangerous ideas in the minds of people who are still young enough to believe that toughness means ignoring protection. So today, we are breaking this all the way down. We are talking about the crash. We are talking about the viral seatbelt comment. We are talking about the contradiction between NLE Choppa's public image and his message. And most importantly, we are talking about why this story matters far beyond celebrity drama. Because beneath the headlines, beneath the reactions, beneath the jokes and the memes, there is a very real question here. What happens when someone survives something they should have learned from, and instead uses it to justify doing it again? Let's get into it. NLE Choppa is not just another rapper with a trending name and a loud opinion. He is one of the most recognizable young artists of his generation. He came up fast, blew up early, and built an audience that stretches far beyond music. Millions of people know his voice, his face, his energy, and his lifestyle. He is not some obscure figure talking into the void. When he says something, people hear it. When he moves a certain way, people notice. And when he turns a personal belief into a public statement, it can travel across the internet in minutes. That is exactly what happened here. The clip spread because it was shocking. Not just because of what he said, but because of who said it. According to the clip that started circulating, NLE Choppa explained why he refuses to wear a seat belt. And the way he framed it was not casual. It was not uncertain. It was not the kind of comment someone makes and immediately walks back. It came out with confidence, with conviction, with the kind of chest-out certainty that made people stop and replay it. To him, wearing a seatbelt was not just unnecessary. He framed it almost like weakness, almost like inexperience, almost like something people do when they have never really been through danger. And that is where the internet erupted. Because for some people, it sounded absurd. For others, it sounded reckless. And for some, especially younger fans who already admire him, it may have sounded believable. That is the part that makes this more serious than a normal celebrity soundbite. NLE Choppa is speaking from a place that a lot of people mistake for authority, lived experience. He is not saying this as someone who has never faced consequences. He is saying it as someone who actually went through a crash and walked away. And in his mind, that survival seems to have become proof. Proof that he is right. Proof that seat belts do not matter. Proof that his own experience outweighs every warning, every safety rule, every statistic, and every hard truth written in blood on roads across the country. But surviving something does not always teach the right lesson. Sometimes people survive the wrong way, and instead of becoming more careful, they become more convinced that they cannot be touched. And that seems to be the heart of this story. To understand why this clip hits so hard, you have to go back to the crash that shaped the whole conversation. Because this was not hypothetical for him. This was not some random opinion floating in the air. There was already a real incident in the background. There was already a wreck. There was already a moment where everything could have ended differently. Back in 2021, during the filming of a music video tied to his first day out energy, NLE Choppa was involved in a serious crash involving his Dodge Charger SRT Hellcat. Even without seeing the exact impact, the aftermath told the story. The front end was heavily damaged. The airbags were deployed. The vehicle looked wrecked enough to remind anyone watching that this was not a harmless moment. This was not some staged little bump. Something serious had happened. And yet the reaction was what made the incident unforgettable. Most people, after slamming a high-powered car into a tree or wrecking it badly on the street, would stop everything. They would check for injuries. They would sit in shock. They would call family. They would breathe. They would realize how close they may have come to something irreversible. But that is not the image that came out of this moment. Instead, what people saw was something surreal. NLE Choppa and the people around him kept the energy going. The cameras stayed up. The atmosphere did not turn solemn, it turned performative. The wrecked car became part of the visual. The damage became scenery. The danger became content. And that is when the story changed from being just a car accident into something symbolic. Because in that moment, the crash did not function as a warning. It functioned as a prop. That image matters more than people realize. A bloody hand, deployed airbags, a mangled luxury car, music still playing, cameras still rolling, people still moving like the moment was not terrifying but cinematic. That is not a normal response to destruction. That is the response of someone who has learned to turn every moment, even a potentially tragic one, into a scene. And in the era of viral media, that kind of image can be incredibly powerful. But it can also be incredibly dangerous. Because when people watch someone survive recklessness and then turn it into a flex, they do not always take away the fear. Sometimes they take away the attitude. They do not absorb the risk. They absorb the swagger. And NLE Choppa has always had a brand built on intensity. He did not rise to fame by appearing cautious. He came into the game with raw energy, charisma, aggression, and a willingness to push hard. That rebellious spirit is part of why people gravitated toward him in the first place. He represented youth, hunger, confidence, and a refusal to be boxed in. In music, that mindset can be magnetic. In business, it can be useful. In reinvention, it can even be admirable. But the same hard-headedness that helps someone break into the industry can become dangerous when it crosses into real-world safety. There is a big difference between saying, "I won't let anyone tell me what I can't achieve," and saying, "I won't listen to basic rules that keep me alive." One is ambition. The other is recklessness. And somewhere along the line, that line seems to have blurred. That is why this story feels so layered. Because NLE Choppa is not a simple figure. He is not one-dimensional. He is not just a reckless guy who never cared about his life. In fact, that is what makes this story even more fascinating. Over the years, NLE Choppa became known not only for music but for transformation. He publicly embraced spirituality, meditation, clean living, veganism, herbal wellness, mental clarity, and personal evolution. He talked about changing. He talked about becoming a better person. He talked about wanting to leave behind negativity and use his platform differently. He leaned into healing, into energy, into balance, into discipline. For a lot of people, that shift was surprising. But for others, it was inspiring. Here was a young rapper from Memphis, known for hard music and street energy, suddenly talking about fruits, herbs, meditation, tea regimens, spiritual growth, and internal peace. He was not just dabbling in it. He was building an identity around it. He launched wellness-related ideas, promoted healthier habits, spoke openly about mental health, and connected his transformation to fatherhood, purpose, and self-discovery. That version of him felt intentional. It felt reflective. It felt like someone trying to break a cycle. And that is why the seat belt statement hit people the way it did. Because it did not come from a person whose entire image is chaos. It came from someone who has spent years telling the world he is becoming more conscious. So people naturally asked, how does that fit together? How do you preach healing while dismissing protection? How do you care deeply about what goes into your body, but ignore what happens to your body in a violent collision? How do you build a wellness identity while mocking one of the simplest habits that can save your life? That contradiction is what made this clip go beyond simple controversy. It turned into a conversation about authenticity, influence, and selective awareness. And if we are being honest, this is not unique to him. A lot of people are deeply thoughtful in one part of life and deeply careless in another. A lot of people eat clean, train hard, pray, meditate, journal, and still drive like they are immortal. A lot of people call themselves conscious while making unconscious decisions when ego gets involved. That is what makes the story feel human. Because contradiction is human. But contradiction becomes more serious when it is broadcast to millions of followers. That is where celebrity changes the stakes. A regular person can hold a reckless belief, and the damage may stay relatively small. A public figure with a young fan base can say one reckless sentence and unintentionally normalize it. And that is why this matters. Because when you are famous, your bad habits do not stay private. They become examples, whether you mean them to or not. Some fans will laugh and move on. Some will disagree, but some will internalize it, especially young men, especially impressionable viewers, especially people who already associate seat belts, caution, and self-protection with fear or softness. When a celebrity reinforces that idea, even casually, it lands differently. It can validate something dangerous. And the danger here is not abstract. Cars do not care about your image. Metal does not care about your confidence. Glass does not care how many followers you have. Impact does not care whether you feel tough. Physics does not negotiate. That is the brutal truth underneath all of this. A crash is not a debate. It is force. And when that force hits, your beliefs do not protect you. Your body pays the price. That is why the mythology around survival can be so misleading. People often take survival as proof that their choices were right. But survival is not always proof of wisdom. Sometimes it is just proof that you got lucky. And luck is one of the most dangerous teachers in the world because it can make bad decisions feel smart. That seems to be exactly what happened here. NLE Choppa survived a crash. He did not suffer the worst possible outcome. He walked away. And instead of walking away humbled, it appears he walked away reinforced, as if the experience confirmed his instincts rather than challenged them. That is a powerful psychological trap. When someone breaks a rule and survives, they do not always think, I should never do that again. Sometimes they think, see, I knew it. That mindset can build over time. It becomes a personal philosophy, a code, a part of identity. And when identity gets involved, correction becomes even harder. Because now, admitting you were wrong feels like admitting weakness. And that may be one reason these statements come out so boldly. Not because the person has studied the issue, Not because the logic is sound, but because changing course would require surrendering a piece of the image they have built around themselves. An image matters a lot in celebrity culture, especially in rap, especially among young stars who came up in environments where vulnerability is dangerous and projection is survival. Strength has to be visible, confidence has to be loud, and anything associated with caution can get framed as softness. That pressure shapes behavior more than many people want to admit. So when a rapper says something like this, it is not just about cars. It is about masculinity, about pride, about trauma, about image, about proving that nothing can break you. But the hardest truth is that real strength is not pretending danger cannot touch you. Real strength is respecting it enough to protect yourself anyway. And that is what gets lost in conversations like this. There is nothing weak about wanting to live. There is nothing soft about protecting your future. There is nothing fake about making it home. In fact, if you strip away the performance, that is one of the strongest choices a person can make. Especially someone with a daughter. Especially someone who has spoken about growth. Especially someone who has already endured enough pain to know that life can change in a second. And that is another layer that makes this story hit emotionally. Because NLE Choppa's life has not been untouched by hardship. He has gone through losses, public struggles, mental health challenges, pressure, scrutiny, and transformation under the eyes of millions. He has spoken about pain. He has spoken about trying to become better. He has spoken about purpose and clarity. He has tried in his own way to build meaning from suffering. That matters. It is important to acknowledge that. Because this story is not strongest when it becomes an attack piece. It is strongest when it becomes a mirror. A look at how people can truly evolve in some ways and still remain blind in others. A reminder that healing is not linear. A reminder that growth in one area does not automatically mean wisdom everywhere else. A reminder that all of us can carry contradictions we do not fully confront. The problem is, most people do not carry their contradictions in public. He does. And when he does, those contradictions influence others. That is what makes accountability important here. Not cancellation. Not mockery for the sake of entertainment. Accountability. Because words like this should be challenged. Not because he is a villain, but because influence without responsibility becomes dangerous fast. And maybe that is the biggest lesson in this whole situation. Not that NLE Choppa is uniquely reckless. Not that celebrities are always bad role models. But that charisma can make harmful ideas look harmless. A lot of people will hear something reckless from someone famous and treat it like confidence. A lot of people will confuse certainty with truth. A lot of people will watch a survivor speak and assume survival equals expertise. But it does not. Being alive after a crash does not make someone right about safety. It makes them fortunate. And fortune can disappear in 1 second. That is why this story should not be reduced to gossip. Because behind the viral clip is a real warning about modern influence. We live in a time where one sentence can reach millions before common sense has time to catch up. Where one clip can be repeated more than a careful explanation ever will. Where the most dangerous message is often the one delivered with the most confidence. And that is exactly why stories like this need context. They need depth. They need somebody willing to say, hold on. Look at the bigger picture. Because the bigger picture here is not flattering. A wrecked Hellcat. A bloody hand. Airbags blown. Cameras still rolling. A public image built partly on healing and enlightenment. Then years later, a dismissive attitude towards seat belts framed like hard-earned wisdom. That is not just edgy. That is a warning sign. It tells us that transformation can be real, but incomplete. It tells us that a person can become spiritually curious, emotionally open, and still carry self-destructive pride. It tells us that brand identity and true discipline are not always the same thing. And it tells us that surviving danger does not always make people respect it more. Sometimes it makes them romanticize it. That may be the most disturbing part of all. How easy it is for danger to become part of the myth. The crash becomes a story. The story becomes an image. The image becomes a philosophy. And the philosophy becomes something fans repeat. That is how bad ideas spread in celebrity culture. Not through formal teaching, through vibes, through coolness, through the illusion that if someone powerful says it casually, it must not be that serious. But it is serious, because somewhere out there, someone younger is listening. Someone who already wants to feel fearless. Someone who already believes caution makes you look weak. Someone who already romanticizes recklessness. And when they hear their favorite artist dismiss seat belts, they may not hear a bad opinion. They may hear permission. That is why pushback matters. That is why context matters. And that is why this conversation deserves more than just memes and comment sections. Because the stakes are real. We have seen too many stories end with sirens, memorial posts, and people saying, "He was just here yesterday." Too many families have gotten calls they can never forget. Too many lives have ended over choices that took 1 second and seemed small in the moment. That is the reality behind all the performance. And no matter how cool someone makes recklessness sound, the aftermath is never glamorous. There is nothing cinematic about a funeral. There is nothing viral about the grief that stays behind. There is nothing tough about leaving people who love you to make sense of what could have been prevented. That is the reality. And maybe that is where this story should really land. Not in outrage, not in mockery, but in honesty. Honesty that NLE Choppa has influence. Honesty that he has shown growth in many ways. Honesty that he has also shown dangerous inconsistency. Honesty that one lucky outcome can become a terrible teacher. An honesty that people with platforms have to be more careful about the ideas they normalize. Because whether they intend to or not, they are shaping behavior. So where does that leave us now? It leaves us with a young artist who has achieved success, endured pain, built a brand around evolution, and still seems caught in a mindset that confuses survival with invincibility. It leaves us with fans forced to separate the message from the man. It leaves us with a culture that often rewards recklessness more than reflection. And it leaves us with one simple truth that does not change no matter who disagrees with it. Protection is not weakness. Choosing life is not softness. And learning the right lesson from a close call might be the most important flex of all. Because the truth is, anyone can act untouchable until the moment life proves otherwise. Real wisdom is not surviving danger and bragging about it. Real wisdom is surviving danger and never giving it that chance again. That is the lesson this story should have produced. That is the lesson many people hoped he had learned. And maybe one day, that lesson will still land. Maybe one day, he will look back at that crash, at that clip, at the reactions, and understand that the people pushing back were not hatting. They were warning. They were saying, your life is worth protecting. Your influence is worth using carefully. And the people listening to you are worth more than a reckless soundbite. Until then, this story remains what it is. A cautionary tale about fame, masculinity, contradiction, and the dangerous things people start to believe when they survive what should have scared them straight. And that is why it matters. Not because it is scandal, not because it is viral, but because somebody, somewhere, is deciding what kind of lesson to take from it. Hopefully they choose better. Hopefully they understand that being real does not mean being reckless. Hopefully they understand that growth is not just about herbs, affirmations, diet, and branding. It is also about discipline in the unglamorous moments, the everyday decisions, the quiet choices nobody claps for, the kinds of habits that do not look cool online but keep you alive long enough to become everything you say you want to be. That is what real transformation looks like. Not just changing your image, changing your instincts. And maybe that is the missing piece here. Because anybody can talk about healing. But healing also means valuing yourself enough to protect what you still have left. Before you go, I want to hear from you. Do you think NLE Choppa truly believes what he said? Or do you think this is part ego, image, and trying to sound tougher than he really feels? And more importantly, do celebrities have a responsibility to think harder before they normalize dangerous behavior in front of millions of fans? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If you made it this far, subscribe, turn on notifications, and share this video with somebody who needs to hear it. Because sometimes the wrong lesson spreads faster than the truth. And sometimes the most important thing we can do is slow down, look deeper, and say what others won't. I'll see you in the next one.